Read this sentence. Now stop. Did you hear it? Not with your ears. Somewhere just behind them. A voice saying the words as your eyes crossed them. Your voice probably. Or something close enough that you have never once stopped to question it. It is doing it right now. It did it this morning before you were fully awake, running through what the day was going to ask of you. It did it in the shower, replaying a conversation from 3 days ago and giving you the line you should have said. It does it in the supermarket. Milk. Did we need milk? You have a voice inside your head, and it almost never shuts up. And here is the thing nobody tells you. You have lived your entire life with this voice. Every decision, every worry, every rehearsal of a conversation that never happened. It has been there for all of it, narrating, arguing, reminding, complaining. And you have never asked where it came from. Think about how strange that is. If a stranger followed you around for 30 years muttering commentary on your life, you would have questions. You would want to know who they were, where they came from, why they never left. But this one is inside your skull, so you call it thinking, and you stop looking at it. Tonight when you lie down, it will be there, going over something you said, planning tomorrow, reciting a worry you have already recited 400 times as though the 401st will finally solve it. And you will let it, because that is just what your mind does. Except it isn't just what minds do. Not all of them, and not for the reason you think. So here is the question, the simple one. The one that sounds almost too obvious to ask until you actually try to answer it. Why is there a voice in your head at all? Sit with it for a second, because the obvious answers fall apart fast. You might say, well, that's just thinking. That's what thought sounds like. But is it? Here is the problem. When that voice tells you something, you already know it. Picture it. You are standing in your kitchen, and the voice says, I need to remember to call my mother back. Who is that sentence for? You already know you need to call her. The knowledge is already in your head. Nobody else is listening. There is no audience. There is no one in the room. So why did your brain go to the trouble of turning that knowledge into words, arranging the words into a sentence, and then playing that sentence back to the one person who already had the information? That is not efficient. That is a machine doing extra work for no obvious reason. Think of it another way. Your brain runs your heartbeat. It runs your balance, your breathing, the tiny corrections that keep you upright when you walk. It does all of that silently. No narration, no commentary. You have never once heard a voice announce beginning digestion now. So why does thinking get a soundtrack? And here is the part that should really bother you. The voice speaks a specific language. Yours. The one you happen to be raised in. If you had been born 4,000 miles away, the voice would be speaking something else entirely. Which means this thing that feels like the deepest, most private core of you, the raw sound of your own mind, is wearing a costume it picked up from other people. That is a strange fact about something you have carried since childhood. So what is it actually doing in there? The first explanation is the one almost everyone reaches for, and it goes like this. Thought is language. The voice is not a strange add-on. The voice is the thinking itself. You think in words, so of course thinking has a sound. It feels right. It matches your experience almost perfectly. Because when you work through a hard problem, you do talk it out. Silently, but you talk it out. Okay, so if I take the job, that means moving. And if I move, that means the lease. And the lease runs until March. Step by step. In sentences. Building a chain you could not hold in your head all at once. And you can feel what the words are doing there. They are pinning things down. A vague cloud of worry about the job becomes a specific sentence about a lease that ends in March, and the moment it becomes a sentence, you can actually work with it. The words are handles. They let you pick the thought up and turn it around. There is something else language does that is easy to miss. It makes thoughts hold still. An image in your mind flickers and drifts. A sentence stays. You can repeat it, examine it, carry it into the next room. Language freezes a thought long enough for you to look at it twice. So the picture is clean and satisfying. Thinking needs words. Words have sound. Therefore, your mind has a voice. Case closed. Except there is a crack running straight through it. And once you see the crack, the whole explanation starts to slide. Because if thought were the same thing as inner speech, then the voice would be running constantly in everyone all the time. And it isn't. To find the crack, someone had to solve a genuinely difficult problem. How do you catch a thought in the act? You cannot just ask people what happens inside their heads. Ask someone whether they have an inner voice, and they will immediately go looking for it, and the looking creates the thing. It is like asking someone if they are aware of their own breathing. The question changes the answer. A psychologist named Russell Hurlburt spent decades building a way around this. His method was almost comically simple. He gave people a small beeper to carry through an ordinary day. It went off at random, and the moment it did, they were to freeze and note down exactly what had been in their awareness in the instant before the sound. Not what they usually experienced, not what they assumed was there, what was actually happening right then caught before they had time to tidy it up. Then he would interview them carefully, sometimes for hours, pulling apart what they had written to see what was really in that moment. And the results did not match what people expected at all. Because when you ask people how often they think in words, most say almost always. It feels constant. It feels like the background hum of being awake. But when the beeper caught them, midlife inner speech showed up in only a fraction of those sampled moments. Depending on the person, sometimes a quarter, sometimes far less. The rest of the time, minds were doing other things, seeing images, feeling something in the body, sitting in a state that had no words in it at all and needed none. So the voice is not the water you swim in. It is more like a radio that switches on and off, and you only ever notice it when it is on, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. If the voice is not always running, then thinking cannot depend on it. And if thinking does not depend on it, then what on earth is it for? Now, push that further, because there is a group of people who push it all the way. Some people do not have an inner voice at all. Not rarely, not quietly, not at all. For a long time, this barely registered because of a simple blind spot. Everyone assumes the inside of their own head is standard issue. If you have a running monologue, you assume everyone does. If you do not, you assume nobody does. There is no way to look into anyone else's skull and compare. So people lived for decades without ever discovering that their inner experience was unusual because the subject simply never came up. And when it finally did, the reaction on both sides was disbelief. People with a loud inner voice cannot imagine silence. They ask, but then, how do you think? How do you make decisions? How do you know what you want? And people without one are equally baffled. They ask you, mean there is a voice, talking all day, and you just live with that. Here is what matters. The people without an inner voice are not impaired. They think, they plan, they decide, they hold complicated jobs and argue and remember and love. Whatever thinking is, they are doing it and doing it fine. They just do it in something other than sound, in images, in a wordless sense of shape and direction, in knowing where they are going without narrating the route. And that quietly demolishes the first explanation. If thought were inner speech, silence in the head would mean an empty mind. It doesn't. Those minds are full. So the voice is not thinking itself. The voice is something laid on top of thinking, an extra, a tool, which means the real question changes shape. It is no longer why do we think in words. It is where did this voice come from and why does it sound so much like a conversation? The answer starts somewhere you would not expect, not inside the head at all. It starts out loud in a room with other people in it. Nearly a century ago, a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky was watching children, and he noticed something that most adults find slightly embarrassing and completely ordinary. Small children talk to themselves, out loud. Watch a 4-year-old build a tower. She is not silent. She is narrating the whole thing. Put this one here. No, too big. The red one. Now, careful, careful. Nobody is listening. She is not performing for you. She is talking to herself while she works. The standard view at the time was that this was just immaturity leaking out. A child who has not yet learned that thoughts are supposed to stay private. Something to be outgrown, like falling over. Vygotsky looked at the same behavior and saw the exact opposite. He noticed when it happened. It spiked when the task got hard. Give the child something easy, and the talking faded. Give her something difficult, something that kept going wrong, and the voice came back stronger and more detailed. That is not a leak. That is a tool being picked up. She was not talking because she had failed to internalize the rules. She was talking because talking helped her do the thing. The words were steering her hands. And then Vygotsky asked the question that unlocks everything. Where did she learn to talk like that? From adults. From the exact voice that had guided her 100 times before. Careful. Not that one. Try the red one. She had heard those words from outside spoken by someone helping her. And now she was saying them to herself in the same tone to do the same job. The voice she was using to guide herself was originally someone else's voice guiding her. She had taken it in, and she was running it herself. Now, Watch what happens next, because this is where the voice disappears. As children get older, the out loud talking does not vanish. It goes quieter. First it becomes a mutter, then a whisper, then just the lips moving with no sound at all, then nothing you can see from the outside. But it did not stop. It went underground. The talking that used to fill the room moved inside the skull where nobody else can hear it, and kept doing exactly the same job. That is what your inner voice is. A conversation that used to happen out loud between you and the people raising you folded inward until it fit inside your head. Vygotsky's word for it was internalization. The outside becomes the inside. The social becomes the private. What was once between two people becomes something that happens inside one, and it explains the thing that seemed so strange at the start. Why does the voice tell you what you already know? Because it was never designed for someone who did not know. It was designed for guiding, instructing, steadying. That is what it was doing when it was outside you coming from someone older, and that is what it kept doing when it moved in. I need to call my mother back is not a message from you to you. It is the shape of an instruction, the kind you heard 1,000 times as a child, still running, still doing its job. And something happened to it on the way in. It got compressed. Out loud, a child says every word. Inside, the voice can skip. It abbreviates. It runs on fragments and half sentences that would make no sense to anyone else, because there is no anyone else. Just the useful part. The call. Mum, tonight. A whole paragraph collapsed to 3 beats, and you understand it perfectly. The voice went in, shed its manners, and kept only the parts that worked. If the voice really is speech that went underground, then there should be evidence of the speaking left behind. There is. When you talk silently to yourself, your body does not go entirely still. Attach sensitive instruments to the muscles of the throat and lips and jaw, and something small shows up. Tiny signals. Flickers of activation in the exact muscles you would use to say the words out loud. Far too faint to move anything, far too small to see. But there. The order to speak is still being sent. It is just being cut off before it arrives. Think about what that means. Your inner voice is not a recording playing somewhere in the dark. It is a speech act. Your brain is genuinely getting ready to talk right up to the last instant and then holding the words back. The child muttering at her tower never actually stopped. She just learned to intercept the signal. And there is a second thing your brain has to do, which is stranger. It has to know the voice is yours. Whenever your brain sends the command to speak, it also sends a quiet copy of that command to the parts of you that listen. A note that says, in effect, this one is coming from us. Ignore it. It is not the world. That is why you never mistake your own inner voice for someone standing behind you. Your brain tagged it before you heard it. It is such a smooth system that you have never once noticed it working, which is exactly what a good system feels like. And it hints at something worth saying plainly. The line between hearing yourself and hearing another person is not a wall. It is a tag applied by your own brain moment to moment. Most of the time, that tagging is flawless and the voice stays comfortably yours. Which brings us to what the voice actually does to you once it is in there. Because a tool that guides you can also do something else. There is a job the voice does that you use constantly and have never given it credit for. Someone reads out a phone number. You have no pen. What do? You say it back to yourself. Over and over in your head in a little loop until you can write it down. Stop and look at what is happening there. The number is not being stored like a photograph. It is being kept alive by being spoken. The moment you stop saying it, it is gone. Your inner voice is holding it up like someone holding a door open with their foot. Psychologists have a name for this loop, and the useful part is what it reveals. Information in your head does not simply sit there. Some of it has to be maintained actively by a voice repeating it. Stop the voice, lose the thing. You can prove this on yourself in about 4 seconds. Try to hold a phone number in mind while saying the word banana out loud again and again. The number falls apart almost immediately. Not because banana is distracting, because the machinery is occupied. The voice cannot hold your number and say banana at the same time. There is one mouth, even the silent one. And this is why reading has a soundtrack. When you read a difficult sentence, the voice comes in and speaks it, because a long sentence has to be held together across its own length. By the time you reach the end, the beginning has to still be there. The voice is what carries it. That is not decoration. That is load-bearing. So add this to the picture. The voice that started as guidance from other people also became the thing that holds your thoughts still while you work on them. A tool for steering, doubling as a tool for gripping. But there is one more property of this voice, and it is the strangest of all. It does not just talk, it answers. Listen to your inner voice closely, and you will notice something that a simple recording could never do. It takes sides. You are lying awake deciding whether to send the message, and the voice says, just send it. And then the voice says, no, wait until morning. And then it says, you always do this. That is not one speaker. That is a room. A psychologist named Charles Fernyhough has spent years arguing that this is the whole point, and that we misname the thing when we call it a monologue. Inner speech in his account is dialogic. It has parts. It has positions. It can disagree with itself. And once you know where the voice came from, that stops being mysterious. Of course, it argues. It was built out of arguments. It was built out of two people talking, one of them proposing, and the other one objecting, and the whole structure came inside intact. You did not just internalize the words. You internalized the shape of a conversation, the turn-taking, the pushing back, which explains something you do every day without noticing. You can rehearse a confrontation in your head and hear the other person's replies. Real ones, ones you did not want. You can argue with your father and lose, and he is not in the room, and he may not even be alive. The voice can run other people. And notice what it also means. Fernyhough's work points out that inner speech has two settings. Sometimes it is condensed, clipped to fragments, barely words at all. Milk. Tonight. And sometimes it expands into full sentences, complete and formal, almost as if spoken aloud. Watch when it expands. It happens when things get hard or emotional, or when you are preparing to face someone. Exactly like the 4-year-old at her tower whose voice got louder when the blocks kept falling, the pattern never changed. It just moved inside. And that same ability, the one that lets you hold a debate alone in the dark, is the one that can turn on you. You know this part already. You have lived it. Because the same voice that reminds you to buy milk is the one that keeps you awake at 2 a.m. It replays the thing you said at the meeting. Then it replays it again. Then it explains in detail how everyone in the room must have received it. Then it starts on something you said in a different room 9 years ago. It does not solve anything. It just circles. A psychologist named Ethan Kross has spent his career studying this exact loop, and he calls it chatter. Not thinking, not reflection. The specific state where the inner voice grabs a problem and spins it without ever moving forward. And what makes it so cruel is what it borrows. Remember where the voice came from. It was built out of guidance, out of the way people spoke to you when you were small and learning, which means the tone comes from somewhere too. If the voices around you were patient, your inner voice tends to be patient. If they were harsh, if they were the kind that pointed out every failure and named it, then that is the tone that got folded inward, and that is the voice now speaking to you in your own head at 2 a.m. The voice does not just carry instructions. It carries the manner of the people who gave them. That is why the way you talk to yourself can feel so unfair, so much sharper than anything you would say to a friend. Some of it is not really yours. It is inherited. A tone you absorbed before you were old enough to decide whether you agreed with it. You did not choose that voice. But here is the thing about a tool built out of conversation. A conversation can be changed. This is where the research turns unexpectedly practical, and the mechanism is so small it sounds like nothing. Kross and his colleagues noticed something about the words people use when they talk to themselves under pressure. When you are stuck in the worst of it, the voice almost always says, I. Why did I do that? I am going to ruin this. I cannot handle it. And I is the problem. Because I puts you inside the fire. There is no distance, no vantage point. The person suffering and the person trying to help are the same person standing in the same place, seeing the same thing. So they tried something absurdly simple. They had people switch the pronoun. Instead of why did I do that, you say your own name. Or you say you. Okay, you are nervous. This matters to you, and that is why it is loud. You have done hard things before. And that small grammatical change did something measurable. People became calmer, they performed better under stress. They talked about the same problem in a way that sounded less like panic and more like counsel. Why would a pronoun do that? Because of where the voice came from. You is the shape of someone else speaking to you. It is the oldest grammar your inner voice knows. When you say you are running the voice in its original configuration, the one built for a person helping another person through something difficult. You are in a sense letting the voice do what it was made for. Say I and you are trapped inside your own weather. Say you and you have stepped back to the doorway where you can see the whole room. Same head, same voice. One word changed. And that only works because of what the voice has been all along. Which brings us to what all of this actually means about being a person. You have been thinking of your inner voice as the sound of you, the core, the one honest thing left when everything else is stripped away. But look at where every piece of it came from. The language is borrowed. You did not invent a single word of it. Every term the voice uses to think about your life was handed to you by people who were speaking that language before you arrived. The habit of guiding yourself with words is borrowed. It came from being guided. Even the tone is borrowed. The patience or the sharpness, the way the voice greets your mistakes, was shaped by how the people around you greeted them first. And if you want the cleanest proof that the voice is simply whatever you were handed, look at people who were never handed sound. Deaf people who grew up signing do not have an inner voice made of speech. They have an inner one made of sign, the hands moving in the mind. The same private running commentary, the same rehearsing and reminding and arguing at 2 a.m, built out of gesture instead of noise. Same machinery, same job, completely different material, which tells you the voice was never really about sound at all. Sound was just the channel that happened to be available. Whatever language reached you first is the language your mind now uses to steer itself. If it came through the air, your thoughts have a voice. If it came through the hands, your thoughts have hands. That voice you have always thought of as most private is actually the most social thing about you. It is other people still talking long after they left the room. That sounds like it should be diminishing. It isn't. Look at what it gives you, because you are not sealed in there alone. When you weigh a decision, you are not one point of view staring at a wall. You are running a conversation, and a conversation needs at least two, and the second one arrived from outside. That is how you argue with yourself. That is how you catch your own bad idea before you act on it. Something in there is playing the other side, and it learned to play it from someone who once played it opposite you out loud. Your self-control is a conversation. Your conscience is a conversation. The pause before you say the cutting thing is a conversation happening at speed between a you that wants to and a you that has heard someone say don't. You carry the people who raised you folded into grammar, still doing their jobs. And when the voice is kind to you, that came from somewhere too. So come back to the question, the one that seemed almost too simple to ask. Why is there a voice in your head? Not because thinking requires it. We know that now because there are people whose heads are quiet and whose thinking is perfectly intact. Not because the voice is you in some pure original form. Every part of it was handed to you. The voice is in your head because it used to be in the room. It began as instructions spoken out loud by someone bigger than you, steering you through things you could not yet do alone. Then you started saying it yourself out loud at your tower of blocks. Then you said it quieter. Then you said it silently. And it never stopped working. That is why it tells you what you already know. It was never delivering information. It was doing what it always did, guiding, steadying, holding a plan still long enough for you to act on it. It is a hand on your shoulder that learned to fit inside your skull. And that reframes the whole experience of having one. The voice is not an intruder, and it is not a symptom, and it is not the raw sound of your soul. It is a tool that came from other people that you now run yourself. Which means the question worth asking is not why is it there? It is what is it saying and who taught it to say it that way? And this is the part I would want you to keep. If the voice is a conversation, then you are not only its audience, you are also one of the speakers. You cannot switch it off. That is not how it works, and chasing silence usually just gives the voice something new to talk about. But you can change what it sounds like. Because it is made of language, and language is the one part of you that can be edited. You can notice in the middle of the spiral that this is not thinking, it is circling. You can change the pronoun and hand the voice back its oldest job. You can catch the tone that came from someone else and recognize it as theirs, not a verdict on you. None of that is a trick to make the voice go away. It is closer to what it always was in the beginning. Two parties talking, one of them trying to help. The only difference now is that both of them are you. So, read this sentence. There it is again, that voice saying the words as your eyes cross them, the same one that has been there your whole life. Only now you know where it came from. It is not a stranger in your skull. It is not the sound of your soul. It is a room you once sat in, people who once spoke to you, a conversation that started outside and never ended, that folded itself small enough to carry. You have been talking to yourself for as long as you can remember. You were just never doing it alone.